I'm Francesca Nestor, Assistant Professor in Politics and Government. I'm co-director of the COVID-19 course, along with Dr. Kira Bailey in Psychology and Neuroscience. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone back for the 19th lecture in our series. Today, we will learn from Dr. Antoine Clark, Dr. Richard Edwards, and Dr. Nancy Gamso. Dr. Antoine T. Clark is an instructor in music at OWU and the chamber orchestra conductor. Dr. Clark is the founding artistic and music director of the McConnell Arts Center Chamber Orchestra. During the summer of 2019, Dr. Clark attended conducting competitions at the New York Conducting Workshop and the Smoky Mountain International Conducting Institute, and served as assistant conductor at the Gateways Music Festival in association with the Eastman School of Music. In 2018 and 2019, Dr. Clark was a finalist for the Respighi Prize in Conducting, and he was a winner in the 2017 International Conductors Workshop and Competition. He has served as music director of the Ohio Northern University Wind Orchestra, music director of the Wayne State College Orchestra, assistant conductor of the Ohio State University Orchestra, and is assistant and music director of the Capital City Chamber Players. Dr. Clark earned the Master of Music degree in orchestral conducting and the Doctor of Musical Arts degree in clarinet performance from the Ohio State University. He also holds the Master of Music degree in clarinet performance from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music and the Bachelor of Music degree in music education from the Virginia Commonwealth University. He participated in the Cabrillo Contemporary Festival of Music, Montauk School and Music Festival, and is currently a Project Inclusion Conducting Freeman Fellow with the Chicago Sinfonietta. Dr. Richard D. Edwards is the coordinator for the music education curriculum at Ohio Wesleyan University, where he also conducts a symphonic wind ensemble, teaches rock history and music appreciation, serves as director for the OWU Summer Music Camp, and maintains an active schedule as a clinician and guest conductor. His doctoral dissertation created the Musical Brain Imaging Research Database, MusicBird, a comprehensive review of all peer-reviewed brain imaging studies involving human subjects engaged in musical processes. Previously, Dr. Edwards taught high school band and elementary general music in Ohio and North Carolina, directed college bands at UNC Greensboro and Ithaca College, and served as the field commander for the Ohio University Marching 110. His scholarly interests include the neuroscience of music, the development of musical creativity, and exploring curricular balance between large ensemble performance traditions and vernacular musicianship. Dr. Edwards earned his MM and PhD from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Dr. Nancy M. Gamso teaches applied woodwinds, history of jazz, woodwind methods, music appreciation, and coaches the woodwind chamber ensembles in the music department at Ohio Wesleyan. Dr. Gamso is the principal clarinetist of the McConnell Arts Center Chamber Orchestra and founding member of the Rococo Wind Quintet and Tour de Anche Reed Trio. Dr. Gamso has served on the faculty with Chamber Music Connection, Columbus's premier chamber music program for students from elementary through adults, and Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp. She performs regularly as an orchestra musician with a Broadway series in Columbus and is a Deodario artist. Dr. Gamso has performed at the Sarasota Music Festival, the Lancaster Festival, and is associate musician with the Columbus Symphony, Pro Musical Chamber Orchestra, the Newark Granville, Central Ohio, and Ohio Valley Symphonies, and the Southern Ohio Light Opera. Gamso's current research project is in the area of American music traditions of blues, Cajun, and early jazz. Born in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and having been raised in the South, Dr. Gamso earned her DMA from the University of North Texas and is often found in Louisiana conducting research and learning about the rich culture of the Mississippi Delta. As a reminder, you can use the chat function to ask questions throughout the presentation. If time allows, we will open up for questions at the end of the panel. And now, the virtual concert hall, performing arts in the age of COVID-19.
Thank you for being here and making it through this class. Thank you to Laurie Anderson and Ashley Beiser for creating the course, and to Kira Bailey and Francesca Nestor for keeping up with all the moving parts of this cooperative effort. Three of us in the music program are presenting, as you know, today. From his position as a professional orchestral conductor, Dr. Clark will be presenting on how the pandemic has impacted professional orchestral ensembles and how Black professional musicians are responding during the pandemic to recent developments in the anti-racism movement. Dr. Edwards will be presenting on how teaching and learning will be transformed in the near term and perhaps in the future by the pandemic. I will begin the presentation with a short report on how musical organizations responded in the 1919 Spanish flu pandemic. Then later, I'll return with a few insights as to how musicians creatively handle sequestered situations, how some jazz and country music organizations have responded during the pandemic, and what music business is hoping to retain when we emerge into our new normal. And I'll finish with a few ways in which music can help you and how you can help musicians. So let's start with some historical context. Music has always soothed and encouraged the oppressed during difficult times. For instance, patriotic and propaganda music during the two world wars kept morale high and supported at home. We have a body of songs from every civil rights movement from really the beginning of human culture. If you know me, you know I'm especially interested in the ways in which music can build community. There's a lovely article in the required readings for the students taking the course that goes into great detail about music functioning in this way. So check that out, this Atlantic April 2020 article on how people are turning to music, turning back to its primary function of bringing people together and community building. And looking back to what was happening during the quarantine in 1919, according to a New York Times article of May 7th, there was less impact on music after that pandemic quarantine than that which is anticipated during ours. Back then, some performing organizations continued on, business as usual. New York did not close its performing halls. Cincinnati Symphony just moved rehearsals to outside the city to avoid the gatherings ban. Others offered fundraising performances for the war effort as they felt called to a higher cause. Remember that this was right at the tail end of World War I. Also, with the cancellations of most live music performances in 1919, a brand new technology, recording discs, received a boost in popularity, which offset some of the lost revenue, at least on the recording industry side. Royalties for musicians had not yet been standardized. When bans on gatherings were lifted 100 years ago, attendance at live music performances surged quickly. Unlike 1919, audiences today have many more options for entertainment than just live performances. And the reality is, attendance at live performances has been waning since the 1980s. It may be too early to tell what will happen with the traditional model of subscription concert seasons and summer tours, but Dr. Clark and Dr. Edwards will be delving into ways in which professional ensembles are planning for the future. I've included a link to this New York Times article in the resources if you want to check it out on the Library Guides site. It's very interesting. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Clark. Can you tell us about your experience during the pandemic?
Thanks, Nancy. Yes, sure. I'll be happy to first start off with how the pandemic has affected me as an orchestral director. Like many of you, I never imagined that we would be dealing with the issues that we're currently facing. And as a music director, I never imagined my career within a global pandemic. My profession involves a host of activities. These include arts administration, programming concerts, writing program notes designed to educate audiences, rehearsing ensembles, and being the face of the orchestra, which includes marketing and fundraising for my professional orchestra and recruiting personnel for my student ensembles. Due to the pandemic, my job has changed in some ways. I've had to think of new ways to engage audiences, program concerts, and educate students. While some aspects have not changed drastically, there are parts of my job that I can only plan for, not knowing in what ways my ensembles will be able to operate on the concert stage. In the middle of March, many institutions suspended face-to-face instruction, and professional orchestras throughout the nation canceled performances. While I was able to connect virtually with my ensembles, the prevention of face-to-face instruction meant that the 4 orchestral groups that I direct could not rehearse and perform. Currently, I am a conducting fellow with the Chicago Sinfonietta, an orchestra that has had the mission of bringing people from diverse backgrounds into the concert hall. The orchestra trains conductors and instrumentalists for careers in music. Training is now in an online format, but missing from the training is our work with a professional orchestra. Online training, while somewhat useful, has presented its problems for many of us. Gone is the typical face-to-face socialization that we all enjoy. Zoom sessions do not allow for the usual transfer of ideas that we have become accustomed to nor does it allow for the hands-on conducting training that we receive from our teacher. I have been appointed as the orchestra's assistant conductor for the upcoming season, but I have no idea when concerts will resume. The training program has been a launching pad into positions with major orchestras for many past participants. With orchestras canceling concerts and furloughing musicians, many of the participants are unsure about the directions of their careers. As a college orchestra director, I had to find new ways to engage my students. The current technology that we have does not allow for musicians to perform together in real time. Therefore, lessons and assignments for my orchestral students became less focused on performance and had more to do with improving their approach to practicing, listening to music, and learning about the historical importance of pieces that they had been learning in the classroom. My professional orchestra, the McConnell Arts Center Chamber Orchestra, was set to perform its final concert of the season in May. To remain connected with our patrons, we put together a virtual ensemble of 10 wind musicians. Creating a virtual performance is a tedious process and can be rather expensive. Each musician made a video recording of themselves with a click track. Once I collected all the videos, I worked with a video and an audio engineer to produce a simulated performance that blended all the musicians together. The 6-minute video took more than 50 hours of editing and cost $1,800. The McConnell Arts Center Chamber Orchestra employs up to 35 to 40 freelance musicians on a given concert. Due to the small size of our stage, it was necessary for me to reprogram the upcoming season. Allowing for 6 feet between myself and all the musicians, we can realistically allow for 12 to 13 musicians on the stage. With this new reality, I have programmed the upcoming season with several small chamber works. Unfortunately, many of the musicians that we usually hire during the season will not be engaged. Being socially distanced from my students and my colleagues has not only prevented us from giving performances, but it has, for the time being, distanced a community of performers from live audiences. As musicians, we have the luxury of making music by ourselves, but we enjoy the teamwork involved in bringing music to life. Many of my colleagues and students have expressed that they miss this important activity in their lives. Even though I have programmed smaller works for all of my ensembles to perform, I'm quite uncertain about what the future will look like when the concert season approaches and when classes resume. There is a possibility that all of our concerts will be put on hold for the foreseeable future. In the remaining part of my discussion, I will address the impact that COVID-19 has had on professional orchestras and highlight a few actions taken by the profession to mitigate the damage of the pandemic. These actions include how orchestras and musicians try to remain relevant in their communities, keep financially solvent, minimize the cancellation of the concert season, and deal with the science behind the virus's transmission. Lastly, I will highlight the response that some Black classical musicians have had in response to the recent death of George Floyd while in police custody. As the rise of coronavirus cases grew in the US in mid-March, many orchestras and opera houses announced cancellations. With the cancellation of all concerts, orchestras have had to be creative in how to reach patrons. As a result, there has been a rise in virtual orchestral performance videos on social media as organizations seek to remain relevant in their communities and provide solace to those affected by the pandemic. Earlier, I mentioned a virtual performance project that my professional orchestra created to stay connected with our patrons after we canceled our final concert of the season. And you can see that video in the resource section that we provided for you. In addition to these virtual performances, Orchestras have also rebroadcasted past concerts on social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube. Not only have orchestras used virtual videos, but also have individual musicians. Many of them are concert soloists or are freelance artists who do not have the benefit of a salary position protected by a union contract. Some musicians have presented live performance broadcasts on social media platforms with links to their Venmo or other payment service accounts to allow patrons to donate money to them. While most musicians are happy to share music in any form with patrons, many musicians have had frustrating experiences with creating virtual videos. Not all musicians want to play into their smartphones. Some musicians have expressed frustration with spending multiple hours trying to record a part for a piece of music that is considerably shorter in length. They end up hating the music, and they miss the lifeblood of performance, which is responding to other musicians. Orchestras recognize their importance in communities that enjoy the arts. They also understand that they may not survive, and if they do, they may face insuperable obstacles to remain solvent in our new reality. While many orchestras realize that they need to be creative and tireless in making contingency plans and solving problems, they recognize that orchestral music is essentially a live experience and that it requires all the participants, performers, and listeners alike to be in the same room together. The famous conductor, Sir Simon Rattle, recently wrote in an open letter that what we may do individually over the internet in these months is all well and good, but the living core of our work is a communion, a sharing of space, art, and emotion, which is both vital and healing. In similar thinking, my former conductor teacher, Mark N. Thacker, explained to his students that we go to hear live music to have a transcendent experience, and that any musical experience has two components: the subject, which involves the listener, and the object, which involves the sounds. The transcendent experience happens when we lose ourselves in the sounds and become one with them. The relationship between performers and a live audience is a centuries-old marriage in music making. While the internet may temporarily help orchestras stay connected, it will not supplant the transcendent experience that we gain from live music. Professional orchestras throughout the nation and the world have had to make tough decisions to keep their organizations afloat. Orchestras in European countries, which are now starting to perform in modified ways, generally receive assistance from their governments. They receive more assistance, I should say, from their governments than their American counterparts. For some European orchestras, up to 80% of their funding is provided by their governments. In the US, orchestras like the Cleveland Orchestra rely on ticket sales, grants, donations from individuals and corporations. To impede the loss of funds, they have had to impose layoffs to staff, furlough musicians, enact wage cuts, and launch fundraising campaigns to remain solvent. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, also known as CARES, has provided the Paycheck Protection Program, which offered forgivable loans to nonprofits, among other business entities, to pay their employees and cover certain other core expenses during the crisis. For some institutions, these measures have not been enough to help them to remain solvent. In some cases, organizations like the New York Philharmonic and the Metropolitan Opera have canceled their fall seasons. The Nashville Symphony recently announced that they would be canceling their entire 2020 season to remain solvent. Smaller budget orchestras that rely on freelance musicians have planned to perform works written for smaller ensembles to save on costs and to meet social distancing guidelines. There has been some research on how aerosols spread from wind instruments and voices. Some researchers have explained that while vocal performance poses a high risk of spreading the virus, wind instruments are less prone to spread droplets or aerosols. Nonetheless, most researchers have suggested that musicians that play string instruments sit 4 to 6 feet apart, and wind players sit 6 to 9 feet apart. With this research, orchestras in European countries that have managed to bring down the virus cases are employing these distances in concerts. They are also limiting the number of audience members in concert halls. The Berlin Philharmonic in Germany has taken additional measures by having their musicians play with plexiglass between the wind musicians, as well as having all members of the orchestra tested for the virus before some rehearsals and concerts. The orchestra members must maintain strict social distancing between meetings to reduce the chance of infection. All performance venues are doing their best to come up with solutions as they go forward in the pandemic. Many orchestras can only plan and hope that the guidelines given in their communities will allow them to put on concerts that will keep patrons and musicians safe. Planning and programming for the upcoming season is like trying to hit a moving target. We truly do not know what the situation will be like when our concerts starts in the fall. What remains true is that musicians and patrons alike want to stay connected and experience music together. In the face of the pandemic, orchestras will have to change their business models and how they envision the concert experience while holding to their missions. During the pandemic, our country is seeing reactions and protests in connection to the death of George Floyd while he was in police custody. Prominent Black classical musicians like Anthony Mcgill, principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, took to social media to express their frustration with racial injustice for Black Americans. Anthony recorded himself playing an arrangement of American the Beautiful that expressed his feelings. He tagged other musicians and me and asked us to join him by creating a video in any manner that we wanted to share in the protest against racial injustice. He used the hashtag #TakeTwoKnees, which he says is a tribute to Colin Kaepernick's kneeling protest of police violence. His video has received an enormous amount of attention, and many musicians from different backgrounds have joined him in showing support for the movement. Through the violin channel, Anthony and other Black musicians that hold top positions in the field or lead diversity-centered music organizations had a panel discussion about their experiences within the classical music community. As a classical musician, Anthony articulates that it is not easy to bring up these issues within his profession. He says that the orchestral community tends to have a culture of silence. As a musician, your job inherently is to listen to others when you make music. For him, as a person of color in a mostly white field, it is tough to breach these political discussions. Anthony, along with his brother, flutist Damari Mcgill, principal flutist of the Seattle Symphony, and other Black musicians put together a virtual performance of the Negro National Anthem, Lift Up Every Voice and Sing, to inspire other young Black musicians. This video was planned well before George Floyd's death, but the subject of the video fit with the current focus on racial injustice and police brutality. Since George Floyd's death, many social media videos, online concerts, and roundtables by Black conductors and musicians have been an outlet for these artists to express their feelings over social injustice and their place in classical music. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. I appreciate it. And now we're going to go to Dr. Edwards about what music learning during the pandemic and in our future holds.
Thank you, Dr. Gamso, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure and a privilege to share our thoughts with you all today. My area of expertise largely fits into how people learn to be musical. I have been a high school band director, an elementary general music teacher, and as you heard in my bio, I work with a lot of different ensembles or courses here at OWU. There are many ways that Dr. Clark, Dr. Gamso, and I are going to, I think, overlap in some of the things we say, but I think there are some distinctive things we can also bring to this. But I'm going to try to summarize and organize my thoughts into 3 different categories for you. First is the way that music has struggled in response to COVID-19. Second, the way that musicians have adapted in response to COVID-19. And looking forward, the way that musicians are persisting even in the midst of this pandemic. But let me focus on just acknowledging that pretty much all of the disciplines that have been a part of this We're in This Together course have said something to the effect of, we have never seen a change like this in the history of our discipline in the last 4 months. And music shares that same stark reality and change and wow factor. For music teachers and for people who participate in music programs at their schools or in their lessons, that is totally true. And there are a couple stories that I want to share with you to help illustrate and bring home, if you will, what the struggles of all of the cancellations, of the distancing, of the sheltering in place has meant for music teachers and music students. And of course, this should always be said, sheltering in place is the right thing to do when it's saving a life. And I'm not trying to suggest that any of these cancellations were the wrong way to go, but I do think it is important to acknowledge how many dreams, hopes, and ambitions, not just of concerts that we were hoping to prepare for a couple months down the road that had to be canceled, but dreams that have been coming for a lifetime had to be canceled. One example that I'd like to share a picture with you. This is a friend of mine from college, and I keep in touch with him on Facebook primarily. And I'm going to try to share my screen with you right now. It's a little fuzzy, but I hope you can see. This is my friend Matt Stanley. He's the band director at Washington Courthouse High School here in Ohio. This picture was taken by his wife, and I've had a lot of friends posting things on Facebook about how they're adapting to the changes. This picture, though, represents the day that in Ohio it was announced by the governor that there would be no more school for the rest of the semester. It was the day there was supposed to be a big pep rally to kind of return to celebrate their seniors. But this was the day that the students and the teachers found out not only were they not going to be doing pep rallies, not only would they not do their final senior concerts or play commencement for their friends, a pomp and circumstance for their friends at commencement. This picture just captures for me what it's like to be so close to something you love, yet so far away at the same time. And I checked with Matt first, and he said it would be okay for me to share this, but I am aware that his youngest child was a member of his band, and being able to perform at her graduation, being able to perform for her senior celebrations, that's just one person's example of what the sort of things that were lost when music and performance went away this past spring. There are a number of other things we've been struggling with. I have to remember to stop share. And for example, at Ohio Wesleyan, we have a very popular summer music camp that just started last summer. We had to cancel that just as a safety precaution. As Dr. Clark and Dr. Gamso have mentioned, hundreds, thousands of musicians have lost their livelihood, as well as the thing that brings passion and joy to them on a daily basis. So there have been attempts to adapt the way we learn to make music or the way we make music with each other. And Dr. Clark mentioned some of the struggles and pros and cons of Zoom lessons and trying to, the challenges of not being able to be present physically when you're singing or making music with your students or your fellow musicians. And you may have seen things like this flow by on social media, and I'm thinking about virtual ensembles. Virtual ensembles are not in real time. We don't really have the bandwidth for dozens of people to all perform at the same time and still hear what they're doing and what you're doing equally together. It gets garbly. But there have been some really interesting technological developments, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, in which virtual ensembles, and I would say probably the most popular first virtual ensemble was proposed and developed by the composer Eric Whitacre with his virtual choir. He has done several virtual choir performances, and there's a link to a summary and several videos of his work in which he has created a conducting track where he conducts the music in his mind, and you can hear the chords. And if you would like to participate in this virtual choir, you sing your soprano, alto, tenor, or bass part as you watch him conduct you on the screen, and then you upload that video, and then through lots of hours and computer power to edit the sound, audio file, video files together, it produces some really amazing video performances where thousands of musicians from around the world who have never met each other in person, they are making music in this video. And it has many interesting questions that we as musicians and members of a 21st century society need to grapple with. For example, is this real music? Is this a new form of real music? It's definitely not the kind of music that many of us have grown up doing, where we learn in the physical presence in real time with others. But inspired by Eric Whitacre, inspired by many other conductors at other schools who have decided, I need to figure out how to do this, because if I don't, I'm not going to have anything for the students in my choir or my orchestra or band to do while they're staying at home. And Dr. Clark is absolutely right. It's not fun to play into your iPhone. But sometimes music is so important to us that we're willing to take what we can get. And so I tried an experiment like that with my students in the wind ensemble here at Ohio Wesleyan. I can kind of share that with you, or I won't play it for you. Again, the bandwidth isn't very consistent when I try to play audio in large group settings like this over Zoom. But there is a link to this video in your resources. And this is just one example of what we were able to put together here at Ohio Wesleyan, kind of like what Eric Whitacre did, but in a much smaller context. This virtual wind ensemble project that we performed here at Ohio Wesleyan was our best attempt to keep us connected through music, even though we were distributed thousands of miles apart as students went back home, not just to Ohio, but all across the country. As we got a little bit better with how to time these things and how to balance the levels between different instruments and recording processes, we started to get a lot of interest from our alumni and even from some of our local students and their music teachers who said, Rich, that looks pretty cool. Can I do that too? And so the final phase of this project, we opened it up not only to the students in our current wind ensemble, we opened it up to many of our alumni from the music department. We opened it up to local music teachers and their students. And again, it was a new kind of way to make music that we would not have been pushed to explore or grapple with had we not been in this pandemic in the first place. Again, I would not say, and I would totally agree with Dr. Clark, I would not say that a virtual ensemble is the same, and personally I would say it's not as good as that live, real, shared performance. But I will share this. It tapped into parts of my emotional limbic system that it made me feel things as a conductor and as a music teacher that reminded me of the powerful emotions I feel when I'm teaching and making music with my students in real time. It was not the same. But I definitely did get feedback from the students that was along those lines. This wasn't the same, Dr. Edwards, but I'm really glad I had this opportunity to still connect through music with my friends. And I think we'll try to keep doing it. But again, we are very eager to persist forward and find a way to make music in real time when it is safe to do so. So that brings me to the last component of my session today, and that's how music tries to persist as we move forward. And again, Dr. Clark mentioned several of the aerosol studies that have or tried to describe the differences and risks involved between singing in the pandemic versus playing wind instruments in a pandemic versus playing string instruments where your air and your breath are not required to perform at all. And frankly, right now, there are a number of summaries of these aerosol studies in my resources for you, but I could probably just summarize this entire Music Persists research section by saying there is a study underway right now at the University of Colorado in conjunction with their music department and many of their different science departments to try and scientifically identify what are the risks in terms of aerosol disbursement of coronavirus, what distance is necessary, is singing or performing wind instruments okay, and if so, within what context, what PPE is necessary, what distancing is necessary, what special devices or bell covers are necessary. These are all questions that are being investigated. And sometime in July, mid-July, I believe, is the latest update. There are many articles about this Colorado study. Everyone's just waiting for it to come out. And this study, I think, is going to affect a lot of public health guidelines from the CDC down to the local county level. So you've got music teachers and conductors from the large Big Ten marching band programs all the way down to local middle school choirs and band programs. We're all kind of waiting on this study to see what is safe. And I've talked to many of my fellow music teachers and conductors. We are all coming up with at least 3 different plans: a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. I think everyone is kind of recognizing that plan A, a normal world, is not what we're going to have in the fall. And plan B, some kind of flex or hybrid where, well, if we were to distance ourselves and have enough PPE, could we play some chamber music in a wide open space or outside? Outdoor rehearsals are definitely a very popular thing that a lot of music teachers are considering for both vocal and instrumental music. But again, a lot of it needs to be based on the science, not what we want. As much as we want to play together as soon as possible, we need to make sure that we make our future decisions based on science and research as to what is safe to make music together again. And this is why we have these plan A, B, C options before us. I will definitely follow up with anyone who is interested to hear more about the different research studies that are coming out on aerosol disbursement. But again, many of us, from the professional to the music education realm, we're all waiting for the end of July when we can start making more specific plans to see how this research affects public health policy. I do want to just finish with a couple more pictures, though. There have been some really, I think, clever ways that musicians have adapted or found ways to persist in this current environment. I want to share another quick story about one of our graduates from Ohio Wesleyan. This is Chris Meadows. He is a band director at Bellevue High School here in Ohio. And when he found out that he was not going to be able to have his commencement band play Pomp and Circumstance for the seniors, they were going to debut their new marching band uniforms. It was, again, another example of a big event. His response to this was to use the Acapella app. And I'm not sharing the whole video. This is just a screenshot. But since they couldn't have commencement in person, he personally, on his trumpet, worked out all the different parts for Pomp and Circumstance and then edited it together so that it could create this authentic performance of the song that goes along with getting your diploma. And then he proceeded to share a picture of each senior as they heard their name announced. I think there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of innovation that is in store for the future, and we don't know to what extent we're going to have to continue to be creative, but I think that every discipline, and especially the one that I'm most familiar with in music and music education, there are a lot of very creative, innovative people out there that are doing the best they can within the safety guidelines that they need to follow. And whether we are doing small chamber ensembles, whether we are doing big groups again when the research is there to support it, whether we have to keep doing some kind of virtual ensemble for a little bit longer, I do have a lot of faith that people are hungry to share music, people are desirous to be passionate about the things they love, and even if that means we have to play into tiny little screens, we'll take what we can get because it's such an important part of our lives. Thank you. And I do want to pass things back now to Dr. Gamso. She is going to take the baton.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich and Antoine. So I have a few more ideas to consider. First, maybe even just why professional musicians and other artists are particularly well suited as to a situation in which they are sequestered. So as a professional musician, we are quite used to making time for practice as well as listening and score study. Indeed, we are especially disciplined to spend a great deal of time working alone. We do it every summer as teachers and every day that we're professional musicians. We're accustomed also to finding creative solutions to make music. Often we have to adapt in live music making situations, and theoretically, at least, this is no different. And we have an especially, if you haven't figured it out already, we have an especially acute threshold for quality performances. So we feel compelled to spend an exorbitant amount of time to produce excellence. In this case, practicing, recording, editing, and mastering virtual performing ensembles, as Dr. Clark mentioned, taking 50 hours to produce a 5-minute virtual orchestra performance. It's like Thanksgiving dinner. We are especially resilient and doggedly determined in the face of adversity, and indeed conditioned to endure a lot of artistic hardship for a relatively short-lived and ethereal reward. So think about that. Now let's discuss the music industry in the popular realm. And by that I mean music culture outside of the classical music world, and how it's been navigating the quarantine and how it plans to incorporate what it has learned into the future business model. Live performances, virtual live performances, have had some surprising outcomes. We've had access to so much more content. Lesser known artists are being discovered, and performing experiences that were prohibitive in terms of cost or location have been made available. Dr. Clark mentioned the New York Phil and the New York Met Opera making their performances available. So here is a couple of examples of that. In terms of artists getting traction, there were 3 musicians in Barcelona recently who locally normally just did local low-stakes gigs, not even in the same band. They just happened to be roommates. But they started producing and posting a new song every day as a made-up band called Stay Homas, in Italian, Stay Home. They went viral in Indonesia and around the world. And although they weren't making money for their postings, they did sell out their first live show in that will happen in July, just 10 minutes after the seats went on online as available. And it was a 1,200 seat venue. Another example, most well-established organizations are streaming live, and so I wanted to take a look at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and I'm going to share a screen with you on that. This one. So this is a well-established organization. As you can see, they have live events with their educational wing, conversations with Wynton Marsalis, who is their Jazz at Lincoln Center managing and artistic director, and full-length concerts of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra from their archived recordings. So that's happening all over the web. There's just so much content available for people who normally would not get to New York, in this case, to see them. Another surprising outcome, here's another website. We are experiencing people behind the myth. For example, let's consider the Country Music Hall of Fame Songwriter Series, which my daughter, Abby Tapia, hosts as one of the senior managers of public programs at the Hall. Country music and pop music artists who normally engage with their fan base from a glittering stage or a glitzy magazine spread are appearing in living room TVs with bad hair and kids and dogs running around in the background. This is only endearing their fans to the performers and strengthening those music lovers' anticipation for returned live performances. Also, a typical Songwriter Series live event at the Hall in Nashville would seat 225 patrons in their theater on a good day, mostly older retired folks who might live there or passing through on vacation. At my daughter Abby's event with Dierks Bentley on July 9th, for example, she had 10,000 unique hits on Instagram Live, and the demographic was decidedly younger. So what does this mean for the business perspective of a nonprofit institution like the Country Music Hall of Fame? Well, Abby was able to get a big name like Dierks Bentley to do the session, which normally would not have been possible with his tour schedule. And Dierks fans were able to hang out in person with him in his house. And the organization, the Country Music Hall of Fame, attracted thousands of new potential clients. So it was a win-win-win in a less than ideal world. Stop sharing this here. Here we go. And finally, on the topic of surprising outcomes of live streamed performances, music has become a solace and a source of community engagement for our socially distanced world. I think I saw in the chat that Kira made a little comment about that. So from front porch concerts for neighbors and ensembles playing music together across high-rise balconies, I'm sure you've seen the videos, even music speaking out against racism, hosted by Black American musicians, these are all demonstrate the music's power to express what words cannot. And we will travel beyond this time with associated musical memories, changed minds, and hopefully our move to action. So I want to talk a little bit about the transformation of the music business and popular music culture. So alternative ways for music and producers to charge for live performances, or ways that would give consumers exclusive live performance access, were quickly adopted after the initial flood of free content available at the beginning of the shelter-in-place order. For example, Patreon's one of the largest crowdfunding sites. I think Antoine mentioned Venmo. Patreon claims to have over 150 independent artists, and that's only grown since this has happened. And what they boast that their membership allows is kind of access for patrons to access exclusive content and to have community insight into the creative process. And it provides a freedom for the artists to do their best work and stability to build an independent career. So those kinds of organizations are ones to invest in. They're doing very well. Large institutions, organizations have instituted software for paid access on their websites. I imagine McConnell will be following suit shortly. They're using Facebook and Instagram Live formats or any of a dozen other formats that are expressly used for live streaming. Even with free content, it is front-of-the-mind advertising you have to consider, which will hopefully pay off in the future. As mentioned above, the free concert live performances serve as a way to engage the artist's fan base, grow followers, and appeal to an intimacy of the casual in-home performance intentionally. In the future, managers are looking to monetize the practice and include it as an enhancement to the live in-person performances and recordings. So I'm just going to conclude with some thoughts about how music can maybe mitigate your anxiety and isolation and boredom and perhaps help others. So this is the section I like to call How Music Can Help You and How You Can Help Musicians. First, here's a helpful phrase that has gotten me through this. It is do less with more focus. This is the time to dig into or nerd out on a particular artist, band, ensemble, genre. Take a deep dive into their story and their music. It can be incredibly restorative and educational to immerse yourself into a single aspect of music. If you are a musician, this is a time for a project. For example, my project this summer, fingers crossed, halfway there, I'm transcribing 2 jazz solos for each on flute, clarinet, and saxophone, and I'm sight reading flute and clarinet etudes every day. It's great fun, it's keeping me in shape, building my ears, and I'm learning a lot. Second, do musical acts of kindness. Offer a porch concert, a singing telegram. Offer some free Zoom lessons. Host a virtual dance party. Never underestimate the power of service to others. And third, throw some love to musicians. Donate, send messages of encouragement, spend time with their on their live performances. These are incredibly supportive for musicians who have no gigs for the remainder of the year, and it will do your heart good. And last, when we do get a time when it's safe to gather, support live music. Let's make sure the performing arts thrive in our new normal. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was terrific. I like how you showcased both the negatives and the challenges as well as the positives that we've seen as a result of this pandemic. I thought that was a very balanced perspective. There was a really excellent question from our participants, and I'll pass that by all of you. So part of what the benefit has been that we've had an increased access, as all of you mentioned, to things that we wouldn't normally have access to. And that's beneficial now for everybody, but it's beneficial at all times for people of lower incomes or people who aren't able to get around as easily as others, or perhaps have travel difficulties for whatever reason. So do you see this increased access continuing even beyond the point at which we could continue to see live music again?
Well, I'll start and you guys can chime in. Some of this was already just being teased out a little. The Columbus Symphony, for example, has an outdoor projection of their indoor live performances, so people can come and picnic outside and watch the performance on a big screen. The Met would have theater tickets you could buy. Now, they're still expensive, but not as expensive as if you were live in New York. So I hope that somehow we'll be able to find a balance with getting people paid and not undermining the business model to be able to keep the access for people.
All right. One of the negatives clearly is the effect upon young artists and upcoming artists. I wondered if you could speak to how we can keep young performers and emerging performers engaged at a time like this.
Go ahead, Rich.
No. Well, I mean, there's many different ways we can identify young performers. I mean, young people on the verge of becoming professionals, and how we can, fan those flames, versus young people who are just trying to learn how to play an instrument or sing in a better way at a young age. More of my experience has to do with the music learning educational format. And again, I know of a lot of people who are figuring out ways to do the best they can with what we basically call Zoom lessons, even when we use other formats and media. And I know of a lot of my students, even my children, who are taking Zoom lessons, and it's basically the teacher plays and then the student plays, and they take turns. They can't really play harmony together, and they definitely struggle because they can't show how to hold things. But that one-on-one focus of attention, even through this visual video format, I would argue, in my personal experience, anecdotally, it's better than nothing. And I can tell you, I have witnessed my kids getting better. Not, I think it would be even better if they had that, live face-to-face lesson. But I can personally say that they are improving. So I think that that's probably one of the main messages to come out right now, is that all is not lost, even if we had to go to extremes. As long as we still have this amazing invention called the internet, as long as people even have a smartphone at their disposal, that is enough for them to at least demonstrate rhythmic, pitch, dynamic awareness. The tone quality, again, is going to vary depending on the technology and the bandwidth, but we definitely, it's better than what we had access to in 1918, that's for sure. And if anything, we can still make and learn music in 2020. It's just not as ideal as we would want. But perhaps Antoine could speak more to the professional end.
Sure. I can also piggyback off what you were saying just for younger students as well. I direct the Northern Ohio Youth Orchestra. And so we're planning this summer of basically doing online learning, virtual, it's obviously the students cannot perform together, but they can learn about certain things like practice strategies or other types of music. So we're going to engage them. As for young adult performers, I have seen a lot of my friends on Facebook. If they live close to each other, some of them have actually organized some events. I think they're social distancing and trying to go by the guidelines that we actually spoke of. Some of them are just maybe even playing a solo piece and not being around each other, or they're doing virtual concerts. So they're teaming up and they are being politically active and while at the same time putting themselves out and trying to still play music.
Thank you. And now with my final question. So even before we were at a pandemic, there were multiple examples of how we weren't investing as much as we could or should in the arts, in our schools and beyond. And Dr. Clark mentioned specifically how other governments have been more generous in funding the arts in a variety of ways than our governments typically are at both local, state, national levels. And it seems to me that the pandemic likely threatens those positions even more, because you have a situation where people are looking for things to cut. So I wondered if each of you might like to make a pitch for why music is so valuable to our society and why we must support it.
I guess I'll just throw out a couple ideas. Whether there's a pandemic or not, I think, arts often find themselves on the edge of a chopping block, and it's expensive to do these things. However, there are, as I've said earlier today, there are innovative and creative ways to share the arts with students, with our communities, provided that we can be patient and safe as we move forward. I think that's the main thing to focus on, and that we are not, I know that a lot of school boards are making difficult financial decisions right now, but I think we need to think about the long term as well as the short term. And let's not cut things that are going to prevent us from being able to continue the importance of this part of human life and society as we go forward. And I guess on the idea of innovation and creative, brainstorming of what this means, to tie into one of the other things that Dr. Clark mentioned about the timeliness of the protests after the George Floyd death, just this past weekend. If you haven't Googled or heard of the story of the violin protest for Elijah Maclean in Aurora, Colorado, I urge you to Google this and check out some of the video from that. It is a powerful, powerful moment that brings two of these big things in all of our lives. What's happening to the arts, what's happening in a pandemic also, and what's happening in response to Black Lives Matter. And Elijah Maclean lost his life tragically last year, and it's been getting a lot more attention lately. One of the things that he did was he contributed to his community. He played violins for kittens at the shelter. So many of the local string players came together at a protest, and there's like dozens of people playing violin and cello, Pachelbel's Canon in D, while 1,000 protesters are around them. And it's an extremely powerful moment that I think captures the importance of why the arts matter.
And I'll just like to add that, those people who have the magic pen to make these cuts, they have to remember that there are young students out there right now who still dream of being musicians and having a life involved in it. And there are students who want to major in music. So in the toughest times, I don't think it's always best to cut those things from underneath them. They need the support just like the math and the sciences and other subjects.
Yeah, I think from the professional industry side of things, we were really at a breaking point already with people producing music and not getting paid for it and being taken advantage of it. So my hope is that we'll somehow find a way to make this equitable for individual independent artists and somehow find a funding strategy that everybody can live with to keep the arts viable.
Well, thank you to our panelists for sharing your time and knowledge with us, and thank you to the audience for joining us and asking excellent questions. Don't forget that you can continue your conversations on the Facebook group. Another way to continue the conversation is the Meet the Prof sessions. Students who have registered for a course credit can join us Thursday at 4 p.m. on Blackboard Collaborate. Community members can join us at noon on Friday in Blackboard Collaborate, and RSVP links will be provided for that. If you have any questions, please contact COVID Course Coordinator at owu.edu, and we will see you again on Wednesday at 4 p.m. for our final panel, moderated by Dr. Ashley Beiser and featuring some of your favorite COVID course faculty. The future is ours. What does life look like after coronavirus? See you on Wednesday.